Hi, my name is Lauren Olson. I am the Zero Waste Coordinator Manager at World Centric, and we have Instagram Live that we'll be doing today for World Environment Day with Rare. So I'm excited to talk with a behavioral scientist at Rare, and we'll talk a little bit more about the state of things in the environment.
Hi,
Hi, so good to meet you.
you too. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so once again, I am Lauren Olson. I am the Zero Waste Manager at World Centric. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. My name is Andrea Wilk, and I'm here on behalf of Rare. And specifically within Rare, I work for the Center for Behavior and the Environment. So I'm super excited to be here with y'all today.
Yeah, that's great. As Stephanie and your staff knows, I have a background in behavioral science, so I'm so excited to talk with you today. Um, well, World Centric, we make compostable food serviceware. Everything is made out of plants, we include a lot of agricultural byproducts in our products as well, like bagasse from sugarcane and production and also like wheat straw left over from gathering wheat. So we really try to make our products as sustainably as possible. And so that's why we're really excited to talk with you today about issues involving the environment for World Environment Day. Do you want to explain to people more about RARE and what that is?
Yeah, definitely. So that's great to hear about everything that's in your products. And I know that we at Rare have actually used World Centric's products at a lot of our events. So we're really excited to be speaking with you today as well. So in broad strokes, Rare is a conservation organization. And we bring a unique approach to conservation because we believe that every environmental challenge involves human behavior at the very center of it. So that means that human behavior is at the root at both the problem and the solution to environmental challenges. And so we apply this approach to community-based behavior change campaigns all over the world. So we've been around for around 40 years, and we've led over 450 behavior change campaigns in across the world in different topics. And within RARE, the mission of the Center for Behavior and the Environment, which I represent, is to really hone in on RARE's expertise in behavioral science and create tools that practitioners within RARE and also environmental practitioners in general can use to start to apply what we know about behavioral science and behavioral insights so that they can really put it into action into their work. So that's in a nutshell what Rare is about.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I was able to read through a little bit of your report about different, behavior change methods and kind of some broad suggestions about how to formulate your campaigns. I was wondering, can you tell us a little bit more about, yeah, how people should think about behavior change campaigns?
Yeah, for sure. So what we focus on is this idea of providing a more complete toolkit for environmental action through behavior change. So really what this is about is expanding the very limited set of tools that environmentalists have for the most part relied on for the past year. So environmentalists in general have really traditionally focused on using information campaigns. So really telling people uh, this is recycling or this is composting, this is what it is, or rules and regulations, which we know of in terms of having laws about what is and isn't allowed or what behaviors are or are not permitted under the law. And then we have material incentives, which are also very commonly used in the environmental field, which rely on taxing people. So I'll tax you if you do this, or I will charge you $5 or 5 cents if you don't bring your own plastic bag, that kind of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
those approaches, while very important, rules and regulations, information, and material incentives, what's important is to add to those the tools that we know from the behavioral sciences are critical to making behavior change stick. So at the Center for Behavior and the Environment, we call these things levers, behavior change levers. And the three that we really introduce are emotional appeals, social influences, and choice architecture. And those three levers are really coming out of the body of literature and of research that has emerged in fields like psychology, behavioral economics, neuroscience, anthropology, and really what these tools are about leveraging these fundamental things that we know about human behavior and human cognition. So, for example, emotional appeals really draws on the fact that people are highly emotional, that our decision making is not always completely rational, that sometimes we're a little bit irrational, or as Dan Ariely likes to say, predictably irrational. And that we're very influenced by emotional cues and emotional messaging, that we're tied to our identities. So that's sort of the bucket of emotional appeals. Social influences really draws on people's care, how people care deeply about what others think of them. So we're very much susceptible to peer pressure or social norms, and we all identify with lots of different social groups. And so really understanding what are all the different intersecting social identities that people have and what are they drawn to in their peers, understanding that is very critical. So that's the social influence piece. And then this last lever is choice architecture. And what that's about is the fact that people are highly influenced by the context of their decision-making environment. So, for example, a lot of what you see in this space, or what is known now as nudges, or what is called nudges. And so, one of my favorite examples is this one intervention made the default on the computer. The printer setting, the default was made to double-sided printing. And so people had to opt out and choose to do single-sided printing, whereas before it was the opposite. Before you had to select double-sided printing, and just that change in the decision environment led to a huge reduction in paper consumption. So what we know from that is that, people are very sensitive to how information is presented and to how the choice is presented. So if we make these small changes in our decision environments, it could have actually a really huge impact. So those are sort of the three behavioral levers, combined with the more traditional levers of information and material incentives and rules and regulations. So if we weave those all together, what our approach is that's where you're going to see lasting behavior change.
Yeah. So just like when I was listening to you talk, just thinking about that, I mean, that's all relying on people having, the choice to make the right decision, which is probably one of the biggest barriers to that whole system is, for example, in our case, having the choice to put your items in compost, industrial composting, it might not even be an option because your composter might not accept them. And so you could, a behavioral intervention campaign wouldn't really work because the choices aren't available. So I think that's probably something that happens a lot, I would think, in your work, trying to help people make the right choice, even though like the choices may not be available, such as like how to, implement something so that fisheries can be left to thrive when the choice isn't really available for it to be there to, say, pay off, fisher people to lay off the given estuary or something like that. I don't know if you can speak to that.
Yeah.
That's just something I'm curious about.
So around your first point, really interestingly, so absolutely correct that sometimes a specific decision is outside of a person's even realm of control. And so to your point about the composting, in that case, the target audience for a behavior change might actually be those people that are upstream, that are making the decisions around whether there's composting in the city or in that place. So those people are also humans with brains, and are making decisions that impact the rest of the system. So having
Yeah.
having a clear understanding of who you're actually targeting is of course fundamental. And I'll say also, our design process is called behavior centered design. So that's sort of the way that we implement the levers that I just mentioned. So that's our 8-step process. And the first 2 steps are really, really about understanding your audience, as you were saying. So getting a really big frame of what's the system in which this problem is happening. And then once you pick your audience, the second step is empathizing with that audience. So understanding what are the barriers, what is and is not possible. So while certain behavior changes might not be in their control or their realm, maybe there's other things. If it's not composting, then maybe there's something else that has a big environmental impact that is within the realm of possibilities for that audience. So yes, choosing your audience and understanding your audience, and understanding how people's circumstances, whether socioeconomic circumstance or just what they're up against in society, how that all impacts their decision environments as we speak, is really, really important.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So why focus on behavior change to stop climate change? I know you've kind of already mentioned that, but let's just kind of crystallize that as opposed to, some other things have been floated out there, policy changes. Obviously, the United States isn't really on board with that right now, but, yeah,
Yeah.
why behavior for climate change?
Yeah, it's a great question. And honestly, I'll start by saying that institutional change, legal change, change from the top down is absolutely necessary. And it is a big part of the fight, obviously, to solve the climate crisis. That being said, we can't really wait until we have a government that will pass that legislation to
Hmm.
take action. And the reality too is that from the research, what we know is that individual behavior does have a very big impact on greenhouse gas emissions. So we did an analysis of Project Drawdown, which is this great institution that I'm sure a lot of people are already familiar with, that presented the top 100 solutions to climate change. And from that, our team did an analysis on how many of those solutions were very much driven by individual behaviors. And we came up
Hmm.
with a list of 30. And those 30 solutions, based on our analysis, would mitigate up to 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions in the next 30 years. And so that's a humongous opportunity to reduce 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions through individual behavior changes. And those behavior changes have to do with everything from the way we consume food to the way we get around, transportation, to where we get our energy from, to what we eat. So there's a lot of different behaviors that are absolutely critical to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so part of the equation is fighting for that institutional change and legislation and electing the kinds of officials that are going to, put us back into the Paris Climate Accord, et cetera.
Yeah.
But in simultaneously, the role of individuals is also critical. And so it's sort of holding those two truths together and then using the science of human behavior to figure out, okay, how can we get people to actually do these things? Because what we know, even if there's a technology out there, it doesn't mean people are going to use it. So World Centric might make the most amazing compostable cups and plates, but if people aren't changing their behavior, whether it's in terms of their buying behavior or in terms of their disposal behaviors, then it's sort of like, why would the technology make that big of a difference? So really the adoption of the technology is where the B Center, as we call it, my team, that's where we're really focusing our energy.
Yeah, yeah, I know it's like you can have these technology sort of forcing policies or whatever, but yeah, if people don't implement it, what's the point, I guess. Um, so how can we apply behavioral insights to spark the adoption of sustainable solutions?
Yeah, so there's really a couple ways to organize all of the different insights that are in the behavioral science literature. And so the three main behavioral levers that I mentioned earlier of emotional appeals, social influences, and choice architecture, those three categories have a lot of strategies that belong to it that can be used really effectively. So for example, one of the things we know is that making behavior observable is really, really important. So for example, there was this study on solar panels in the United States, and they found in the study that the biggest predictor of whether a house had solar panels on their home was if other people in their neighborhood had solar panels. So the biggest predictor of whether you would put a solar panel on your house is if your neighbors had a solar panel on their house. And so that is just one example of a phenomenon that is widely documented, which is that when we see our peer group doing something, we are more likely to want to do it for the simple reason of wanting to fit into our social circle and wanting to be part of this norm. And so making behavior observable could take many forms. It could mean that there's public pledges, for example, where people publicly commit to doing something. That's a form of making the behavior observable. There's different ways of, for example, I don't know if you're familiar with O-Power, but they send these energy reports to consumers that show them how much energy their neighbors are consuming compared to them. So that's another example of making other people's positive behavior observable. And along with that, what's important is that you're promoting, it's usually very effective when there's some people that are doing the environmental behavior. It's really effective to spotlight those people, and instead of saying how many people aren't doing it. So for example, there's this funny study where if you tell people that a lot of people are littering, all of a sudden more people are going to be littering because that's the norm. So what we've seen is that spotlighting people who are champions in their communities can be really powerful as a way of sort of making them into like a social hero, and then people will want to be like them. So that's, one example of social influence. Another example in terms of harnessing emotional appeals is you really harnessing the power of pride and of other really positive emotions, rather than necessarily focusing on shame, which a lot of the climate movement has done in terms of like doom and gloom and really shaming people. There's which can be very effective, of course. There is a whole body of literature on the power of pride and how when we make people feel a kinship with natural resources and proud of their resources, that they will be more likely to want to protect it, because they are celebrating that resource, whether it's water or the earth or their local watershed. It's making them feel proud, and so that sort of ties them to that cause more so than if you just said, "Hey, the watersheds are really important." So making that message really personal and linking it to their sense of pride in their identity has been found to be really effective. And then the third category that I'll mention, which is what I mentioned with the double-sided printing example, is this idea of choice architecture. So changing the decision environment or the way that options are presented. So for example, reducing meat consumption is a really big part of addressing climate change. I'm sure everybody who's listening already has definitely become familiar with that. And so a choice architecture intervention that's very cool that was done by folks at the Better Buying Lab, which is part of the World Resources Institute. They work on menu design, and they found that if you have a separate section that's a vegetarian section on a menu, people are less likely to order it than if you scatter the vegetarian dishes with all the other options, because you present them as equally desirable, whereas separating them off kind of makes it seem like those are like lacking, or like that they're only for vegetarians. So if you're not, if you don't identify with being a vegetarian, you might just skip it, skip even looking at them. So simple things like that, changing how options are presented can have really powerful effects for certain behaviors, like reducing meat consumption, increasing solar panels, like I said, reducing energy consumption. So these tools and behavior change levers are really meant to be used together. So there might be an example of using an emotional appeal, making people feel proud, and also a social influence together. And then maybe there's also a rule or regulation, which is one of the more traditional levers. Maybe all of those things are happening together. And so there might be a rule that the government institutes that is then complemented by this social and emotional message. So they really can work together. And by no means are we saying that, that the behavioral levers alone are the solution, rather to mm-hmm. integrate them into a more complete toolkit. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, it seems like everything really has to work in conjunction with each other. Nothing can be a standalone. So you can't just have a policy. You can't just have a campaign and expect people to do everything. It's all got to work together for the same goal, but be presented in a way which is very palatable and easy for people to understand what actions you want them to take.
Right. Yeah. And really, key to that is knowing your audience and empathizing with your audience, and sort of like what we were saying earlier about knowing what message will land for who, because one campaign mm-hmm. message might work in one part of the city. And then if there's a different part of the city where people associate with different things or have different religions or different cultures, then it might be different, mm-hmm. Even in the same state or in the same city, let alone in different countries, of course. So really being able to adapt and be flexible in terms of how you present an environmental effort, and mm-hmm. and linking it, making it really personal, linking it to something that people already identify with, is a really effective strategy, I think, for environmentalists to take.
This might be out of your sort of area at Rare, but I'm just curious, how do you test these sort of messages with your different audiences? Like, how do you figure out like what sort of appeal they would like, or would get them to move on the desired topic? How do you fine tune that without looking like a crazy person or something?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a very good question. So in our behavior center design process, which is this 8-step design journey that we present at the center, one of the steps is testing your audience. And so that is the moment where you get feedback from your audience around, does this work? Does this not work? So built into the process is this critical step of getting your audience's feedback on it. So that could look like focus groups, where you take a sample of your audience and poll them on what they think, or it could be surveys. So it really depends on the nature of the campaign, but definitely testing the content with your audience is key, and it's built into our design process. With Rare's own programs, I know that, first of all, before we go into any community, it's usually by invitation. So a community invites us to come and partner with them on an effort that they're doing. And so that automatically gives us partners that are steeped into the community and really know that community's values and what they might connect with. So, and then within Rare's own programs, there's definitely this phase of design where, there's a lot of interviewing that happens with your audience. You have to learn about all these different components, like what are the barriers to the behavior that you're trying to solve? What are their social and emotional, beliefs and identities? And so really learning about your audience, designing the campaign, and then testing it, and then revising if you need to revise, are built into both Rare's programs as a whole and our behavior center design journey that we now offer, which everybody can find on behavior.rare.org, which is our behavior change learning platform that has all of these resources on the 8-step process.
Yeah, I love that your nonprofit, makes that available to everyone. That's so needed to not have that part of some sort of commodified system or something like that, but to have that that resource available, particularly with environment being a shared resource. So I greatly respect that you make it all available for people, and also not tucked into academic journals, which people don't have access to or maybe don't want to sift through, or they can be written in such a way that can be off-putting and difficult for a layperson. So I think that's really great that you
Oh yes, our absolutely our one of our biggest missions is to translate the research and the science, so that people like you and me, people who work at companies like World Centric or at NGOs or in Fortune 500 companies, so that anybody can really use the science of human behavior to drive environmental outcomes. So I'm glad that you think that it's more digestible, that our content is more digestible, and I certainly would love for people to check out behavior.rare.org and let us know, yeah, what you guys, how you guys can use these tools, or what what you want to learn more about.
Yeah, I think that's so great. How can people, I guess, we already talked about how people can learn more about Rare, but how else can people support your work in terms of what Rare is trying to do with behavior and climate change?
Yeah, well, I think people definitely checking out behavior.rare.org and a lot of our reports that are on rare.org, the general Rare website, which has a lot of content. We have this one report called Climate Change Needs Behavior Change, where the case for a behavioral solutions to climate is laid out. So what I was just saying about the case for why behavioral science matters for climate, that is all in that one report. And so there's a ton of great content. But right now, really in the moment that we're in, I would really, really point people to some of the environmental justice leaders and environmental racism experts that are really commenting a lot, always, but especially right now, on this intersection between climate change and racial justice. And I think that I saw you guys were promoting some really cool activists on your story, on the World Centric story. So we 100% support, people really listening to those voices, especially right now. For example, Elizabeth Ayanna Taylor is an awesome biologist and big climate advocate in that space. Also, Robert Ballard, who is known as the father of environmental justice, has written a ton of really interesting work about this intersection. And so I would say that our behavioral science approach is really unique and involves in a lot of ways, like I said, empathizing with your audience and using behavioral insights. And it's interesting because a lot of you can't really drive an environmental outcome in a vacuum. Like people are steeped into their environments, and so you can't separate these social justice issues and racial justice issues from the environmental outcomes that you're trying to achieve. So I would definitely say that the voices of these leaders are so needed right now, and that's where I would point people to right now, honestly, on climate.
Yeah, maybe we can talk after this and put together a little resource list that we could both share on our social channels about that.
Yes.
I think that'd be great to put those in print, some books and blogs and things like that to check out. I think certainly with, COVID-19, we've seen that, places who are already experiencing environmental racism and have higher instances of, asthma, type 2 diabetes due to lack of, availability of food and things like that, that they are suffering more. And, these communities definitely were suffering before COVID as well. So I think it's just our times right now have been very poignant about pointing out like the issues that we have in our country in regards to environmental racism. So I think it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the behaviors that are so essential for climate are also so essential for racial justice. So even just if you look at the food system and the behaviors that are involved in that, food justice is a huge part of environmental racism and what's been happening to communities for decades. And so if we want to drive forward these environmental solutions within the food system or in general, really seeing them as in tandem with the efforts of environmental justice leaders is so important.
Yeah, definitely. Well, is there anything else that you would like to talk about?
Um,
We covered a lot of topics today,
we covered a lot
really
of
quickly.
ground. I would mainly really encourage people to go on behavior.rare.org and to keep engaging with us on these issues, because it's thankfully a lot of people have the time right now to engage and really talk about these things.
Mhm.
So that's sort of the silver lining of everyone being quarantined. But yeah, we'd love to hear from your audience, and yeah, keep the conversation also with World Centric, that's doing awesome work. So yeah, we're really grateful to be on here.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking with us today. And I think we should just keep this conversation going about how behavior and also like our new, world really just highlighting environmental racism and how we can kind of all be informed and integrate those sort of issues into our more of our everyday. So thank you so much for talking with me today, and appreciate everything that Rare does, and enjoy your day.
Thank you so much. You
Happy
too.
World Environment Day.
Happy World Environment Day. Thank you so much.
All right, bye.
Bye bye.